Tonight, my top special focus is on the history wars that are now dividing our political class and some would say intellectuals across the country as well as average citizens. A hologram of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, remember, was unveiled at the India Gate on Sunday. The Prime Minister who launched it claimed that his government is now giving credit to icons of freedom movement who were forgotten by earlier governments. Read the Congress Party. Earlier Sangh Parivar leaders had claimed Sardar Patel and Veer Savarkar were also ignored by the Congress, who apparently, according to them, focused on the Nehru-Gandhi family. Now the Congress has hit back and says all that Prime Minister Modi is doing is trying to appropriate political icons identified with the freedom movement because the RSS doesn't have any. We now live in the 21st century. And therefore, how should we in the 21st century be seeing the icons of our freedom movement? Should they be seen from a partisan political lens? Are icons being appropriated, or is justice finally being done to those who some say have been ignored? Either way, this seems to be now Prime Minister Modi's latest pet project. Take a look at our top story before we come to our face-off.
Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose's hologram statue is unveiled at the India Gate on his 125th birth anniversary. The hologram under the canopy that once housed the statue of King George V will be replaced with the sculpture later. The statue on Rajpath will overlook the country's seat of power, Rashtrapati Bhavan, Parliament and the Central Vista. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurating the hologram claimed there was an attempt earlier to wipe out the memory of great freedom fighters.
स्वाधीनता संग्राम में लाखों लाख देशवासियों की तपस्या शामिल थी, लेकिन उनके इतिहास को भी सीमित करने की कोशिश हुई। लेकिन आज आजादी के दशकों बाद देश उन गलतियों को डंके की चोट पर सुधार रहा है।
The Narendra Modi government, since coming to power in 2014, has embarked on a mission to correct what it calls is an attempt to limit credit for freedom struggle and nation building to the Nehru-Gandhi family. The mission started with Statue of Unity that opened in Gujarat in 2018. The statue dedicated to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel is twice as big as Statue of Liberty. The NDA government has also put the focus on freedom fighter and social reformer विनायक दामोदर सावरकर।
सावरकर के खिलाफ झूठ फैलाया गया। बार बार यह बात कही गई कि उन्होंने अंग्रेजी सरकार के सामने अनेकों मर्सी पिटीशन फाइल की, लेकिन सच्चाई है कि मर्सी पिटीशन उन्होंने अपने को रिहा किए जाने के लिए नहीं फाइल की थी, महात्मा गांधी के कहने पर उन्होंने मर्सी पिटीशन फाइल की।
The government's mission to rewrite historical wrongs has left academics divided.
I think it's very important to remember his ideals, not just worship him in statues of gold or granite or hologram, but actually imbibe his real deep ideals, which are as relevant in India today as they were during the freedom struggle.
There has been a tendency from the side of the Congress to not recognize the non-mainstream streams of the freedom struggle, be it that of the INA, be it that of the communists and so on. But I don't think that it is the BJP or the Prime Minister who are qualified to set that thing correct.
Sardar Patel, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, Veer Savarkar. The Narendra Modi government claims that they are trying to resurrect the legacy of these freedom fighters. However, the critics of the BJP claim that the BJP is trying to appropriate their legacy. Now, between this crossfire, which is completely political, are caught our freedom fighters who did a lot for the struggle, for the freedom struggle that got us independence. With camera person Shamsundar Ghosh, this is Suryagni Roy for India Today, Kolkata.
Okay, let's then have our face-off and raise the big question today. Rewriting history or course correction? Is Prime Minister Modi resurrecting icons for a new India or simply appropriating their legacy for the BJP and his government? Are national icons being caught in a political crossfire? These are the questions that I will be raising tonight. I'm joined today by two people who represent two perhaps alternate viewpoints. Joining me now is Dr. Vikram Sampath, historian and author of a recent book on Savarkar. Appreciate your joining us, Vikram, author and of the Savarkar book, and Professor Aditya Mukherjee, who's a professional historian with JNU for years. Appreciate your joining us, has written extensively on the freedom movement. I want to quote, gentlemen, what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said yesterday. He said, "It was unfortunate that after independence, efforts were made to erase the contribution of several great personalities along with the culture and heritage of the country. The freedom struggle involved the penance of lakhs of people, but there was an attempt to limit their history. Today, after decades of independence, the country is correcting those mistakes with boldness." Now, is the Prime Minister exaggerating and trying to suit history for his political purposes, or is he course correcting? Professor Sampath, you first. Dr. Sampath first.
Thank you, Rajdeep. Good evening. I think that, particularly in the context of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, I think that the country and successive governments of whichever party have been rather unfair with him and his legacy in two main ways, and I'll elaborate those. One is, of course, in the way he's remembered and commemorated. The other is the entire mystery that shrouds his disappearance in 1945. In fact, I was reading an India Today article which said that a portrait of Netaji was actually unveiled for the first time in Indian Parliament only in 1978. That is 31 years after independence. I don't know why it took so long for the Parliament to actually recognize someone who was actually instrumental in pushing this country towards eventual freedom. And this angst about being sidelined was not something that someone else expressed, but his own family members. In 1955, there's a letter that Shishir Bose, his nephew, writes to Netaji's wife, where he says, and I quote him, "If you were in India today, you would get the feeling that in India's struggle, only two men mattered, Gandhi and Nehru. The rest were all just extras." Unquote. So there was this feeling just 8 years even after independence that the contributions of Netaji were sought to be undermined or belittled. Then, of course, we had this very unsavory episode that for almost 2 decades, between 1948 to 1968, the central government, with the IB that reported directly to the Prime Minister of India, had placed the Bose family members under intensive surveillance, where IB sleuths were tailing to his family, intercepting, recording letters, and so on. And so this brings me to the second point, that the country really needed to know what happened to this brave man. Why did he disappear? How did he disappear in 1945? Remember, we've had 3 commissions, Rajdeep, of inquiry. The Justice Shahnawaz Commission, Justice Khosla Commission, which said that Netaji died in the plane crash, but this was rejected by the Morarji Desai government in 1978. Later, the Vajpayee government established the Justice Mukherjee Commission, which said that Netaji actually faked his death and escaped to the Soviet Union. And this was rejected by the UPA government in 2006. So as your reporter just said, I think it's a sad truth that the legacy of Netaji, and like him, several other freedom fighters, has become a ping pong ball between political parties, between governments. Now, when it comes to the Modi government, on these 2 fronts, at least Netaji, the first front, Netaji being given the recognition, the islands in Andamans being renamed, his this hologram right in the heart of Delhi, Parakram Divas, a separate day to commemorate him. Why did it take so long to actually earmark the day, January 23rd, as a day to remember for Indians? But on the second front, I think the Modi government has only partially fulfilled its obligations, where only part of the files have been declassified, the Netaji files. There are still about 87 files which are locked up in the PMO, which are supposed to be so secretive that they cannot even be disclosed under the Right to Information Act. And so it's supposed to harm India's relations with other countries and so on. So I think on both these fronts, but at least it has achieved one and a half of its responsibilities, the other half of declassifying these files and getting to know the entire truth about this man who, as I said, pushed India eventually to freedom, is the right of every Indian to know about Netaji. And that is why I think these legacy wars, which sadly become mired in political controversy, occupy so much of political space.
Okay, we've started with Netaji, so I'll ask Professor Mukherjee to respond. We've given Vikram a lot of time to explain why he believes that Netaji deserves his due. Professor Mukherjee, was Netaji denied his due by the Congress all these years? Your response.
Yeah, as you said in the very beginning, that is the Prime Minister doing it as part of a political strategy. I have no doubt that that is what it is. If you want to honor somebody, one should and one must honor Netaji. But it doesn't, the motivation seems to be to attack the opponent, that why didn't you do it? When did you do it? The motivation for the last several years, a motivation which unfortunately even a learned person like Vikram Sampath is encouraging, is to try and show as if Nehru and Netaji were at each other's throat, and somehow Nehru was hiding documents and doing this, that, and the other. I mean, this is not history. This is really unacceptable. And now raising questions like this, whether he died on the plane crash or not. I mean, even his daughter, his wife, everybody accepts that Nehru was one of his closest friends was Subhash Bose. So Bose was there at Kamala's death on Nehru's side. There is a room in Subhash Bose's house still today, which is called the Nehru's room, because Nehru would always go and stay there. I mean, there is umpteen evidence of this. Now, to now use this to try and denigrate, to attack the Gandhiji and Nehru because they had differences of opinion, is again totally ahistorical. I mean, Bose would have been most upset with this. I mean, do remember that while on the one hand, Gandhi calls Bose prince among patriots, and both Nehru and Gandhi repeatedly talk of Bose's tremendous ability to keep the Indian people together on the basis of communal harmony, the Hindus and Muslims, etc. These are things that nobody is talking about. What you're talking about is who built this statue? Did you do this? Did you do that? I mean, I grew up in Delhi, and there is a Netaji Nagar, there is Netaji Subhash Marg, there is Netaji Subhash Place, there is a Netaji Subhash statue in the Netaji Subhash Park right next to Red Fort, which is in terrific disrepair under this current government, etc. Nothing is done about that. But you want to put up a hologram, and then you want to blame everybody else, denigrate the national movement, and turn the tallest of our leaders into some kind of horrors. I mean, this is totally unacceptable. Wasting time of historians. We should be studying history. We should and not be debating issues like this at a time when half our population is starving, when our children are starving, when there is malnutrition, when there is unemployment. All we can do, Rajdeep, on your show is discuss a non-issue like this.
The fact, sir, just a minute.
To misuse history.
Just a minute. You said, I have listened to you patiently, and both of you, while you said non-issue, why am I raising it? It's not me. It's the Prime Minister of the country who has now decided that he has made it an issue. He is the one who unveiled the hologram. There will be a statue there. He is in fact saying 23rd of January will be celebrated at Parakram Divas, and Republic Day celebrations will start from the 23rd. I just want to know, Professor Mukherjee, one response that I wanted clarity on. Do you accept that the left, for example, the United Communist Party in the 40s saw Netaji as an imperial agent, that post 47, the Congress and indeed the Nehru government was accused of spying on Netaji's family to that extent? Do you agree that because of the obsession of the Congress party, maybe even the post-Nehru Congress with the Gandhi-Nehru family, the likes of Netaji and even Sardar Patel perhaps lost out a bit? Do you concede that?
This is the mythology that has been spread by the BJP. I mean, just as they spread the mythology of they being nationalists, they call them Hindu nationalists, so all we start calling them nationalists. People who were known throughout our national movement as loyalists and communalists are now nationalists. Similarly, this mythology that everybody else has been neglected. Who has been neglected? As I said, again, if you look at in Delhi, they said nobody's name is mentioned. There is Lajpat Nagar, Sarojini Nagar, Lakshmi Bai Nagar, Naroji Nagar, Netaji Nagar, Kidwai Nagar, Khan Market about with Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Chitranjan Park, BC Pal Bhavan. I mean, just name it. Ramakrishna Mission. R.K. Puram. Mukherjee Nagar. Even there, people are honored. S.P. Mukherjee College. Subramania Bharati Nagar. So what is this? Again, as I said, that using history for wrong purposes.
Right.
Let us celebrate. We haven't had not only Nehru and Gandhi. We've had 100-year-long struggle. We've had great people in it. Let's celebrate all of them. But not every time we celebrate one, let us not attack the other and say, why didn't you celebrate him?
That's a good point. Let me take that to you, Vikram. The sense is, Vikram, that at the moment there is a partisanship, a polarization, that you pit one against the other. Bose is being pitted against Nehru. Earlier, Patel was being pitted against Nehru in a way. Bose is being pitted against Gandhi. I mean, these were all comrades in the fight for freedom. I just saw a letter very affectionately written in 1936 by Bose to Nehru inquiring about his health. They were all on the same side. Is this the fact that the RSS somewhere didn't have their own freedom icons? So now in the 75th year, Amrit Mahotsav, desperately looking for people who may be seen today as anti-Nehru or anti-Congress and latch on to them. Sardar Patel first, now Netaji Bose.
Rajdeep, I don't understand this whole charge of appropriation and so on. After all, when the Prime Minister of a country at the time of the 75th year of independence honors some leaders, and rightfully so, that can't be called appropriation. And the very fact that many of them were left orphaned, whatever Aditya Mukherjee might say, as I read out, I mean, anything that doesn't fit his description cannot become ahistorical. As I read out, Netaji's family's, letters where they had this angst that it seemed that in 1955, as early as 1955, that the narrative was being built that there were only two men who mattered for India's freedom struggle, Gandhi and Nehru. And this is his own nephew writing about it. Now, the very fact that many of them, why did it take 3 decades or 4 decades to honor Sardar Patel or an Ambedkar with a Bharat Ratna, much before even Indira Gandhi and Nehru and others got it. So the very fact that many of these people were ignored obviously lets them open. Orphans they get adopted by other people, and nobody can fault a politician for making political capital out of it. So just as he mentioned that there was a lot of love between the two. It was a very nuanced, complex relationship. And I'm sure Aditya Mukherjee knows that the manner in which there were differences with Gandhi and the reason why Netaji
it was, that's precisely a nuanced, complex relationship. Therefore, they can't be reduced to cardboard characters. So-and-so is now against the Congress, so-and-so is with us. These are complex figures. The worry, Dr. Sampath, is the manner in which, for example, Netaji's views on communalism or Hindu Mahasabha are very clear. Now, the Prime Minister is not going to mention that. He's only going to mention what suits him. There's this cherry picking going on, and when politicians cherry pick, they end up dividing iconic figures like Netaji. Netaji belongs to all Indians. He doesn't belong to one side or the other.
Indeed. And so, in fact, Rajdeep, that is perfectly correct that he belongs to all Indians. And that's why I think the need to honor him should have happened much more and in a much better fashion. And the very fact that, when he even escaped out of India, the only statement in his support, ironically, came from the same Savarkar. You spoke about nuances. The Congress was curiously silent about it. And it was Savarkar who said, and I quote him, "May the gratitude, sympathy, and good wishes of a nation be a source of never failing solace and inspiration to him wherever he happens to be. Wherever he happens to be, I have no doubt he will continue to contribute his all, even his health and life, to the cause of Indian freedom," unquote. So I think, as you said, the nuance is very important to see. Just as there was a loving letter about Nehru in 1939, Netaji also complained to his brother that no one has done me more harm than Jawaharlal has done. That is 1939, much after the 1936 letter. He also had things to say about Gandhi, where he said he's an old, useless piece of furniture who has done good service in his time, but is now obsolete. And he's an obstacle now in the cause of freedom. So these nuances are important not only for politicians, but also as historians who should not become political party spokesperson and
that's the worry, that the debate has become so shrill, hyper polarized and partisan. We could, as you quoted Savarkar on Bose, I can also quote Bose on Savarkar, where he says the ideas of Savarkar and Hindu Mahasabha of anti-Muslim propaganda and practice means full collaboration with the British. So there are various views. Professor Mukherjee, it seems that this has now become right versus left. For the longest time, the left was accused of monopolizing history, of deciding who is iconic and who is not, how should you project someone. Now you've got a new government, which is an avowedly right-wing government, and they are looking at history from their lens. Should historians also fall for that trap?
Not at all. This is not right versus left. This is a historical perspective versus a completely imagined perspective. This is not being able to understand great people who had differences and yet could work together. It is after Netaji leaves the Congress and forms the forward bloc that Gandhiji insists on calling Netaji's and for his opinion on what to do in the next step on several occasions. I mean, I can give you endless examples of this. Netaji, when he forms his INA brigades, he calls them Gandhi Brigade, Nehru Brigade, Azad Brigade. And he tells his soldiers that when you enter Indian soil, the commander-in-chief will be not me, but Mahatma Gandhi. These are the people. Nehru could write an entire autobiography critiquing Gandhi, and yet they could work together. And here we have petty people.
But Professor Mukherjee, post that period. Professor Mukherjee, post 1947, do you believe, or certainly post Jawaharlal Nehru's death in 64, did the Congress, or post Shastri's death in 66, did the Congress become so attached to the Nehru-Gandhi family that they forgot about everyone else? Is that true?
Post Nehru's death, I will give you an example. If you talk of Subhash Bose's family, please at least talk about those who are professional historians in that. Sugata Bose, the Harvard historian, who just in today's newspaper has reported what happens in 1967 when Netaji Subhash's sword is brought from Calcutta to Delhi, in a massive way, celebrating it all along the way, and from the station till this thing, there are huge crowds, and the President of India, Zakir Hussain, the Vice President, V.V. Giri, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi received the sword in Red Fort, and she gave some moving speech.
But why did it take so long? Sorry to intervene. Why did it take so long then for them to be, for Ambedkar to be given a Bharat Ratna, for Patel to be given a Bharat? Are these questions not to be asked? Are these valid questions or not?
These are not valid questions. Ambedkar was invited in the first ministry that is formed by Nehru. In his cabinet, when Ambedkar was not even part of the Congress. Gandhi insists that Ambedkar be made the chairman of the drafting committee. He did not have to. I mean, the Congress did not need Ambedkar to write the constitution. So here is an inclusive approach, and now you pick on Bharat Ratna kyun nahi banaya. As I said, if this is not history writing, this is not the way great societies are built. If we are going to look to the future like this, correct every wrong that has happened, then we will be dead before we've even taken one step forward.
Let me therefore take that to you, Dr. Sampath. There is a sense that all of this, and we started off with it, there is a sense that the Prime Minister or the ruling government is doing this with one lens of only political benefit. There is no real appreciation of the ideological persuasions of Netaji when it came to his strong stand against communalism or Hindutva politics. It's all about who can be appropriate to convince people that we are the genuine nationalists. So it's not about actually ensuring that Netaji gets his due, but it's actually about how can I politically, electorally benefit.
Which politician would not think about that, Rajdeep. Every politician is only trying to take political benefits. So I think for historians to enter into that political combat is very suicidal, and that does immense
No, should
harm
politicians
to the discipline
enter into it? No, no. Just as historians should not enter the political realm, should politicians be entering into history? Should politicians be so obsessed with rewriting history all the time?
They will wade into it, Rajdeep, and history has always been the handmaiden of the ruler. It is a malleable enough discipline which allows itself to be ingratiated by the person in power. And it's happened in the past. It's not as if it's a new phenomenon that's happening now. It's happened in the last 7 decades in the manner in which Indian history has been written and presented. I think we had a very elaborate discussion on that in the India Today conclave with you moderating that discussion. So this is something that's always happened. So to that extent, I mean, Netaji's views on the Mahasabha, obviously they were rivals, political rivals, but Netaji also formed, an alliance with the Hindu Mahasabha, which failed for the Calcutta municipal elections. Later, he formed an alliance with the Muslim League in 1940. At the same time, when he was also giving out these statements, against the communal nature of both these parties. So I think I time and again say, when we get politics into it and make this binaries, then I think all the nuance that historiography requires, that goes out of the window. That way, Sardar Patel was one of the people who banned the RSS. So why would the BJP then appropriate him? So I think there are. We need to look at these in a broader perspective. As I said, as the Prime Minister of a country and not the Prime Minister of a political party, it is his duty to actually honor all the leaders of the past, particularly those who have not got the limelight as much as they should have. And that's what I think is being done all across the country, and more so in the 75th year.
Final word from you, Professor Mukherjee. Do you believe, where will this lead us? What is the path you fear this will lead us to? Will it lead us, dare I say, to demonizing Nehru for a new India and valorizing anyone who's seen as anti-Nehru? Is that your fear? What is your fear? What would you like to see? What is the ideal thing you'd like to see?
I think that is exactly what is happening. The misuse of Bose to demonize Nehru, to demonize other stalwarts of the Congress, A, and B, what the Prime Minister should be doing is appropriating the values of Subhash Bose and others. And appropriating that value, he should be condemning those who are calling for genocide of Muslims and minorities. Subhash Bose would have stood up today for that. His blood would have boiled at the Prime Minister keeping quiet when there are calls given for genocide of minorities in this country. That is what the Prime Minister should be doing, rather than pointing fingers at others. Why didn't you give such and such a Bharat Ratna? Why didn't you put his statue here or there? Has it discussed the statue in a republic? Should the statue go at India Gate? Has he discussed it? There has been a whole debate on this. Even Mahatma Gandhi's statue was not put up there on this argument. That in an imperial canopy in a republic, you don't put replace a king with another statue. And here, the wise man decides one night and next morning you're going to do this. I mean, is this how a democracy functions?
Okay, let's leave it there. I think both of you have put out very, very important observations from very different perspectives. And I just wish that these arguments could take place in a civilized, sane manner, and eventually we could find a more inclusive way forward. Unfortunately, that's missing because politics has become so hyper-polarized, and dare I say, fearfully, so has society.
But we had a civilized discussion.
Yes, Professor Mukherjee and Dr. Sampath, I appreciate your joining me here tonight on the news today. Fascinating to hear two alternate perspectives on history always. Stay well, stay safe. Good night, Shubh Ratri, Jai Hind, Namaskar.